Good afternoon, everyone. So we're just going to give a couple minutes just to wait and make sure that we don't have other folks trying to join. So we'll probably start at about 2 minutes after. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Research and Discovery Grand Rounds. My name is Bridget Jones. I'm a professor of pediatrics at Children's Mercy and part of Frontiers as a member of Translational Endeavors in the Frontier Training Center. So today I am very happy to welcome and introduce our speaker, Dr. Jenna Rogers, who's assistant scientist in the Wisconsin Center for Education Research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Rogers seeks to advance the science of mentorship by identifying and understanding the mechanisms that underlie effective mentoring relationships and how they vary across cultural groups. She aims to contribute to the diversity and development of the scientific workforce by delineating how the underlying mechanisms in a research mentoring relationship work together and how mentorship education interventions impact those mechanisms and lead to trainees' persistence. Dr. Rogers is a co-investigator on the National Research Mentoring Network Coordination Center, a nationwide consortium designed to enhance the training and career development of individuals from diverse backgrounds, communities, and cultures for pursuing biomedical research careers. And Dr. Rogers also serves as the research director for the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, which helps organizations advance their mentorship efforts. So today, Dr. Rogers is going to talk to us, I believe, about the science of mentorship. So very excited to hear her presentation today. So with that, I think I will turn it over to you, Dr. Rogers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully we're good and everyone can see that. All right, so as Dr. Jones said, my name is Jenna Rogers. I essentially work on research with all things mentorship, mentorship education, mentoring relationships, and how those tie into both short-term and long-term mentee outcomes. Today, I want to talk about the science of effective mentorship. So a quick overview as to what the different sections will be. First, we're going to talk a little bit about how mentorship matters, how and why it matters. Then we'll look at mentorship education and how this can be used to improve mentoring relationships. Then we'll look at within mentorship education, some testing, dissemination, adaptation, and expansion that our group has done, as well as touching on mentorship ecosystems and the culture of mentorship and what that means. All right, so mentorship matters. Across the board, mentorship has been shown over the past 20 years to really be a vital factor when we look at research training environments. If everyone could just think back for a moment as to how impactful their mentoring relationships have been up to this point. So as you're thinking through your career trajectory, just take a minute to reflect upon different mentoring relationships, positive, negative, but the impact that those had. You'll find when you ask this question and do a poll across groups, most individuals say that they were extremely or very important. There's, as I said, a huge line of research over the past 20 years, really building into why mentorship matters and showing that it is important. So key findings, graduate students are more likely to persist in their academic decisions if engaged in positive mentoring experiences. Graduate students cite positive mentoring experiences as the most important factor in completing a STEM degree. Women and underrepresented students are better integrated into the STEM academic community if they're engaged in positive mentoring experiences. And again, positive mentoring experiences increase the recruitment of underrepresented mentees into graduate school and research-related career pathways. There's also a focus on psychosocial needs, and that's associated with an increase in how mentees perceive the quality of mentoring relationships and how satisfied they are with that relationships, which then in turn enables them to see themselves as more competent STEM researchers. And mentored graduate students and medical trainees are more likely to publish their research than those who are not mentored. So despite this 20 years of research, there's a couple things that we know about trainees and mentors. Trainees typically have unequal access to mentoring, and quality mentoring varies by groups. And scholars from underrepresented groups typically receive less mentoring than their peers from overrepresented groups. So it's not equal across the board. We also know about mentors that many have not received mentor training. Despite talking about how important and the impact that mentorship has, most mentors are put into a role and assumed they know how to do that role without any sort of education or background training on it, simply because they themselves went through the system and were a mentee at some point. Many do not believe that socio-emotional and instrumental functions are a part of their mentorship role. And they do not know or believe of the realities that their trainees may experience, especially those from underrepresented groups in STEM. And in general, many adopt a general colorblind ideology. So due to this building set of research, again, over the past 2 decades, there has slowly, there's been a national focus on mentorship that's gained steam. So we see this in the National Science Foundation. They're now requiring postdoctoral mentoring plans and undergraduate research and mentoring programs. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute, they have started their mentorship education for the Gillian Scholars Program, and they just launched their scientific mentorship initiative in the past year or so. Then we see at the NIH that there are training grant requirements for mentor training now, as well as the National Research Mentoring Network, which is 10 years of funding for a large consortium, both to develop and disseminate mentorship educational programming, as well as test the efficacy of those programs. And then also the National Academies of Science. So they've put out a couple of reports now. The first one is the report on mentored undergraduate research experiences in 2016. Then the report on graduate STEM education, which highlighted mentorship as a key component in 2018. And finally, the report on the science of effective mentorship in 2019. So one of the reasons that despite 20 years of research around mentorship, there's not a clear set of findings really up until the 2019 National Academies report, is mentorship is complex. It doesn't always follow the same model. It doesn't always look the same. There's a lot of different definitions of what mentorship can be. So one of the first things that the National Academies did was create a common working definition when we say mentorship. So what does that mean? So the National Academies in the report defines mentorship as a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of their relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. So mentorship includes career support functions such as career guidance, skill development, sponsorship, as well as psychosocial support functions. So the emotional support or role modeling. And these are all aimed at mentee talent development. So using this general common definition, the National Academies has begun to kind of go through all of the research on mentorship, look at it, and come up with some key findings. One of the first things they noticed after they come up with this definition or decided upon the definition is, again, mentorship is complex. It follows a range of structures. It doesn't always look the same. In fact, it very rarely looks the same across settings, programs, institutions, even types of mentees. So you have your traditional kind of dyadic structure, one mentor, one mentee. There's also triad structures with either 2 mentors, 1 mentee, or 2 mentees and 1 mentor. You have a collective or a group structure. So the mentee perhaps has peer mentees and then multiple mentors. And then finally, there's what is called mentoring networks. So the mentee has an entire network of support individuals, different resources, different mentors, and each of those kind of fulfills a different role within that relationship. Some of the highlights from the National Academy study. 1, effective mentorship is associated with positive mentee outcomes. 2, effective mentorship is a learned and developed skill. 3, recognizing and responding to cultural identities contributes to mentorship effectiveness. And 4, institutions have a critical role in broadening access to effective and inclusive mentorship. So we're going to go through these a little bit and talk about how SIMR and the University of Wisconsin is helping to support these different areas. So mentorship matters in positive mentee outcomes. Again, effective mentorship has been linked to enhanced mentee productivity, self-efficacy, career satisfaction, and is an important predictor of academic persistence and success of all students. So the research mentoring relationship is a key component of a trainee's research experience. It's going to impact the mentee's self-perceptions, which lead to both short-term and long-term positive STEM outcomes. The real question, though, is when we say research mentoring relationship and an effective mentoring relationship, what does that mean? What does that look like? This is the area that we've primarily been researching and creating interventions to address. So Christine Fund and her group in 2016 put out an article which really identified, again, across the wide expanse of literature, some key attributes that have been found in effective mentoring relationships. So you can see the different domains: research skills, interpersonal skills, active listening, psychosocial skills, diversity, culturally focused skills, and sponsorship skills. And then within each of these domains, you can see kind of some of the key components of that. This is a lot. And again, part of the problem that the National Academies ran into is, while all of these have been shown to be important in different studies of different groups, perhaps using different definitions of mentorship, what had yet to be done was really bring these all together and compare them in one place. So this was kind of the National Academy's focus. So when we think again about effective mentorship, what that means, how you create effective mentoring relationships, which then tie to positive mentee outcomes, all of these areas, all of these domains are important. So if you'll remember, I said in the beginning, one thing that we know about mentors is very few of them receive any sort of training or guidance about how to be effective mentors. So all those attributes and domains that I just listed, there's not necessarily training in those. It's not something that's generally talked about or covered. So one of the, another recommendation from the National Academies is that, again, effective mentorship is a learn and develop skill. So we need to use an evidence-based approach to support mentorship. So program leaders should support mentorship by ensuring there are evidence-based guidelines, tools, and processes for mentors and mentees to set clear expectations, engage in regular assessment, and participate in mentorship education. So mentorship education, what does that look like? What are some of the options for it? Well, the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences and Research, or as we call it, SIMR, actually serves as the national training hub for mentorship education. So this is something that over the past 15 years has been built up, these different curriculas. All of the curricula that we create is open access, so anybody can come into our website and download it. We also offer workshops to help train mentors, help train mentees. There is self-based online trainings. There are also train the trainer workshops, which is where we train facilitators to go out and implement either mentor or mentee trainings back at their home institutions. And then, of course, there's implementation workshops to support that as well. Some of the key elements of our approach when we look at mentorship education and the curricula and workshops that we offer, we use a process-based using case studies and group problem solving. It's aimed at awareness raising and reflection, provides a confidential and brave forum to share the collective experience of mentors or mentees across a range of experiences. And then, of course, it links to relevant resources for the individual to continue to advance their mentorship. There are standardized learning objectives and competencies. Some examples of these were the key ones, the initial key areas: aligning expectations, promoting professional development, maintaining effective communication, addressing equity and inclusion, addressing understanding, fostering independence, and then of course, many more that have been developed as well. So as I hinted at, the original curricula is constantly being adapted and expanded. This is just a screenshot from the SIMR site, the website that I said anyone can go in and download the curricula. So we create it, develop it, adapt it, we test it. Once it's been tested and we've shown the efficacy of it, then we go ahead and put it up here on our website. So there's over on the left-hand side, mentor training curricula. It's called Entering Mentoring. There's Entering Research, which is a mentee training curricula. This is geared at undergraduates or grad students who are entering research. Then there's the Mentoring Up curricula. And this is designed for those who are kind of postdoctoral trainees and junior faculty. So each of these you can actually go in, you can download a complete curricula, or you can do what's called a custom curricula, where you can choose the different modules that you want to cover. That's the fostering independence, addressing equity, those kind of sections that I listed. There was about 6 on there from the original curricula, but there's about 15 you can choose from now. In addition to all the different modules and competencies that are covered, we have also adapted this not only across career stages, but also across disciplines. So when you go onto our website, I think we're up to about 20 different disciplines now. And there's a curricula that's been adapted and tested that you can download there, again, depending upon what exact group. Really what this is, they follow the same format, but the case studies, the examples in there are relevant to each type of discipline. All right, now we get into the part that I'm really excited about always. As I mentioned, all of our mentorship education components are tested. Original testing started with randomized controlled trial, which actually looked at the mentor training curricula for clinical and translational researchers. So the topics that were covered within this, there were 4 sessions, and they covered introduction to mentor training, maintaining effective communication, aligning expectations, assessing understanding, addressing equity and inclusion, fostering independence, promoting professional development, and articulating your mentoring philosophy and plan. So within this randomized controlled trial, originally there was 283 mentor-mentee pairs. Okay, so 1 mentor, 1 mentee, which came from across 16 different CTSA sites. And then the mentor and the mentee were both interviewed at baseline. The mentors were then randomized. So some were put into a control group and some were put into the intervention group. Those in the intervention group were the ones who received essentially the treatment or went through the mentor training, those 4 sessions with the 8 different competencies that I just listed off. Those who went through the training, the mentors received immediate post-training surveys. And then 3 months after, both the mentor and the mentee completed follow-up interviews. So just the mentors went through the intervention here, but the mentees were also asked 3 months post to assess whether or not they saw any changes in their mentors, essentially. So that's important. We have self-perception results, but we also have the mentees' perception of the mentors' changes as well. And the results showed that there were skill gains. The mentors did report skill gains across all of the different competencies. So communicating effectively, establishing expectations, assessing understanding, addressing diversity, fostering independence, and professional development. The pre to post self-reported changes were significant across each one of those. And then when you take the composite MCA score, so the MCA, the Mentoring Competency Assessment, essentially is the skills assessment for each of those different modules or competencies put together into one scale. When we look at that composite MCA score, we see from pre to post that the intervention group had a significantly larger amount of change compared to the control group, showing us that mentor training did in fact work. And this is the primary outcome in the paper, but one of the key secondary outcomes, again, those mentees were also interviewed, and the mentees of mentors in the intervention group also reported significantly higher behavioral changes in their mentors than those who were in the control group. So not only did mentors feel and report that they had gained skills after mentor training, but the mentees also noticed those skills. And then again, on that 3-month post-training follow-up interview, questions about behavioral changes were also asked. How a mentor feels about how skilled they are is important, but what's really important when we get to mentoring relationships is the behaviors that they're employing with their mentees. So when we look at this, we see that for the control group, 47% had no change versus only 3% in the intervention group. So the training really did have a strong impact here. And then you can see within the intervention group, those that went through the mentor training, 87% actually implemented some sort of behavioral change associated with the training, as compared to only 42% in the control group. Okay, since the original randomized controlled trial, we have continued to test the efficacy of the different curriculas of the mentorship education materials that we're putting out there. So SIMR has grown. We now have a staff of what we call principal facilitators who regularly go out and implement mentor training as well as mentee training using kind of the core curricula that SIMR has come up with. So these are expert facilitators in mentor and mentee training, one could say. So the data that I'm about to show you is from 78 different principal facilitator-led mentor trainings, just from 2018 to 2021. And again, on our surveys, there's an overall 56% response rate. So when we ask participants of these trainings, right after the training, their immediate post surveys, how satisfied were you with this training? Was it a valuable use of your time or not? We find that overwhelmingly, 92% say yes, it was a valuable percent of their time. And then that they would also recommend it to a colleague. We also find continued patterns from that randomized controlled trial. So across all the different competencies, when we look at them, we see significant increases from before to after reporting of skill gains. So effective communication, mentors report from before to after, significant changes in that. And again, we see that pattern going across the board. We also see the intent to change. So these are immediate post surveys. So all we can capture on these is intent to change, but overwhelmingly, again, 85% of participants say yes, they intend to make changes to their mentoring relationships or their mentoring steps as a result of this training. And then despite kind of those immediate post-survey scores, we continue to dig a little bit deeper to find out how mentor training works across various contexts. As mentor training is implemented, again, it doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's in 1-hour workshops. Sometimes it's in 15-hour workshops. It just depends on the site and how they want to implement the training. So we've gathered data. You can see at the different dosages of this training, how many participants we have for each one. Overwhelmingly, trainings tend to be, anywhere from 2 hours to around 8 hours or so. Despite the dosage of training, however, we see significant gains. So even in low dosage training, those between 1 to 3 hours, there are significant gains from pre to post in the mentoring competency assessment, how they feel about the overall quality of the mentoring they're providing, and whether they intend to make behavioral changes. But we also see a significant difference between what we call low dosage trainings and high dosage trainings. So the takeaway, any amount of mentor training is effective. It's effective whether or not you've had some sort of training before, whether or not you're a new mentor or have been mentoring for 20 years. Any sort of dosage of training is effective, but trainings that happen between at least 4 hours and up tend to be more effective than under 4 hours. Due to COVID, we also had to adapt lots of our trainings online. So historically, our trainings were in person. We would have a facilitator go to the site, or we would have participants come to us to host these trainings. But with COVID, we had to pivot and we started to do a lot of online trainings. So one of the questions we explored was, does it matter if someone attends a mentor training online versus in person? Do the results remain the same? So you can just see the number of participants here that, again, between 2018 and 2021 participated in online versus in-person trainings. And then using propensity score matching, we examined the differences in mentor training outcomes of face-to-face versus online trainings. We found that the mode of training does not make a significant difference on our 3 mentoring assessments. So the mentoring competency, the overall quality of mentoring provided, as well as intended behaviors. Factors that were associated with training outcomes were hours of training, so the dosage, as well as previous mentoring experience. So again, this reflects and continues to iterate the same findings. While all amounts of training, whether online or in person, are impactful, it doesn't matter if it's online or in person, but what does matter is that the more training, specifically 4 hours plus, you get higher results, you get higher levels of confidence and intended behavioral changes. And then mentors without previous mentoring experience, they report a greater benefit from mentor training than those with some previous mentoring experience. However, overall mentoring quality and MCA gains were significantly greater in participants without previous training, but even those with previous training still showed increased results. And then SIMRs continue to adapt and expand. In particular, if you recall back to the National Academy's report, the third recommendation was, or the third key finding was recognizing and responding to cultural identities and how these contribute to mentorship effectiveness. So we have taken a deeper dive over the past few years into raising cultural awareness. So how do identities affect mentorship in STEM? Cultural identities and science identity matter for academic and career development, the experiences of STEM mentoring relationships, and culturally responsive mentoring is a learned skill set in which mentors, regardless of their race or gender, show interest in and value students' cultural backgrounds and social identities. And then cultural responsive mentoring can also increase students' satisfaction with mentoring and the commitment to STEM goals. So this is an important variable. Some of the qualitative findings as we were beginning to really dive deeper into culturally aware mentoring, culturally responsive mentoring, what that looks like, what the needs are, we found that cultural diversity is often viewed as an interference variable. So quotes such as, "I don't care where you're from, it's science," were pretty standard. We found that for mentors who experience culture and science as related, they focused on mentees' culture, not their own. Example, "I do think people come in with different perspectives, and those perspectives alter how they view research and how they view the lab environment." And then we also found that mentors and mentees tend to disagree on whose role it should be and when to address diversity. So you find quotes such as, "If where they're from and how they're communicating is important to the discussion, then they should feel empowered enough to bring it up." And finally, both mentors and mentees noted that addressing cultural diversity is complex, for which few feel equipped how to handle. So this really pushed on Simmer and our team to create an adaptation of a mentor training, mentee training that really touched on cultural responsiveness and cultural awareness. So we now have the culturally aware mentorship training. There are kind of 3 components of this. So part 1 is really exploring the intrapersonal components, part 2, the interpersonal components, and then part 3, skill building. And some preliminary findings from this. So culturally aware mentor training is a 2-day training. It was implemented at 12 sites with 257 participants, and initial pilot data showed self-reported significant gains. And then just a sample of the impact on the 24 post-pilot training survey. There's a greater realization of mentors' own racial and ethnic biases and insensitivities. There were more individualized mentoring strategies, and there was better engagement with historically underrepresented students, even by historically underrepresented faculty. So here you can kind of see 2 of the competencies from this training. You have the first one where the mentor intentionally creates opportunities for mentees to bring up issues of race, ethnicity when they arise. And the second one, respectfully broaching the topic of race, ethnicity, and mentoring relationships, significant gains in how mentors feel they are skilled in these areas after pre to post training. There is currently a randomized controlled trial. It's part of the National Research Mentoring Network, undergoing the CAM training, or the Culturally Aware Mentor training. So that actually wraps up at the end of next year. So they are starting, they've completed all of their implementations and are getting their data back, and then you'll start to see articles, but the findings hold. This training is incredibly impactful. So again, there were interviews after this initial kind of pilot testing of the Culturally Aware Mentor training. So interviews 18 to 14 months, sorry, 14 to 18 months post-training. I think this should be 24 months. So on the interpersonal component, it's really made me, I think, more reflective, or introspective is maybe a better word, about my own sort of viewpoint of things, my own biases, my own prejudices, really making the effort to sort of discern those things and figure out what's going on inside of me, especially in my relationships with others. And on the interpersonal component of it, I think the training has opened my mind into understanding that there are differences. I always looked at myself as someone who is colorblind and culture blind, in the sense that I didn't judge people based on their color and culture. But there's another side to that as well. You need to acknowledge that difference and validate the difference, because the difference is a good thing, not a bad thing. And then finally, for the skills and behavior component of the training, I'm more comfortable navigating discussions that are needed about cultural competency and things like that. More comfortable speaking up when someone says something that I'm like, oh my goodness, what did you just say? I think particularly with students, I'm more comfortable saying, okay, time out. So I think all of the trainings have helped me gain a bit more confidence in my ability to speak up. All right. Finally, I just want to touch on, again, putting us back into context, because we've been in that mentorship education realm for a little bit in the different curriculas and testing and deeper dives and adaptations that Simmer has done. Pulling us back out, we started with the questions of, does mentorship matter? How does it matter? Why does it matter? We know that mentorship education is a key component of this, but something to remember as well is effective mentorship, effective mentoring relationships don't happen in silos. In fact, they are part of what we call mentorship ecosystems. So how do you create a culture of mentorship within these larger ecosystems? And this is something that the National Academies also touched on as well. So mentorship ecosystems include the individual, programmatic, institutional, and disciplinary society levels of support and resources for research trainees. So while trained mentors and effective mentors are important, it goes beyond that. In order to have effective mentorship, it has to be a part of this larger kind of culture of mentorship that's really rewarding it. So institutional transformation and support of effective mentorship involves mentees, mentors, training program directors, departmental chairs, deans, provosts, college presidents, and external partners, all of whom can use mentoring as one intervention to increase retention in STEM disciplines and help move a more diverse group of students along STEM career pathways. Again, to foster this culture of mentorship, colleges and universities can support more effective mentorship on their campuses by increasing access to quality mentors, providing mentorship education for mentors and trainees, promoting the use of mentorship tools, evaluating mentorship and mentoring relationship effectiveness with validated measures, and using data and research to hold broader conversations about mentorship activities and innovations, and encouraging faculty and staff to share mentorship challenges, innovations, and evidence with peers. So again, the Center for the Improvement of Research Experiences, Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, or CIMR, really strives to help institutions and universities with these different components. We've created a lot of mentorship education materials. We also do consulting as to how to really promote each of these kind of areas of recommendation from the National Academies report. Okay. And then finally, just some acknowledgements. Of course, it's not CIMR alone that's done these things. The UW Madison has supported us greatly. We also have a lot of other partners who and funders who have partnered with us on different projects and really helped us to get to the stage that we're at now. So we just want to make sure that they are all recognized as well. All right, that is the end. I will stop sharing my screen just so I can see if there's questions or what's happening.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rogers. That was really excellent. So I don't see that we have any questions in the chat. If there's someone that's on that wants to turn on their camera, if they have a question, I think we have time for verbal questions as well.
I have a quick question for you. Thank you so much for this information. I was wondering about the train the trainer and what kind of individuals usually take that, what the time commitment is for that, and what you've seen from the dissemination side, like how that's impacted their organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have trained over just around 1,500 facilitators through SIMR. So those trained facilitators can go out and implement both mentor and mentee training. It is a highly effective dissemination model. So SIMR knew early on that we couldn't count on our small staff to train everybody. The goal is to get research mentor training and mentee training out there and in all institutions, all universities. We can't do that ourselves. So we used a train the trainer model where we would have, a set number of individuals come in. Typically, it's about 10 to 12 participants in the facilitator trainings, and they're typically one day. We do host those in Madison. There's also the opportunity to host them at institutions. So sometimes, Boston University, for example, will say, I want to host 2 facilitator trainings next year. We have one of our staff come in and host the facilitator training, and then those facilitators can go out to different areas on their campus. There's also an online option now. I believe it's 2 to 3 half days online. They split it up because a full day online tends to be quite a bit. So there's quite a few different options. We offer customized evaluation services. So those trained facilitators who go out and implement, we offer the service to run surveys to those participants. That's been highly successful. We actually have data points on over 6,000 trained mentors from those surveys. All of them show positive and an increase in skill gains, training value, all of those things are positive. So overwhelmingly, it seems to be working.
Wow, that's excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? So I have a couple. So in looking at the impact of the mentor training, are you all planning to look at all of the long-term impacts on the mentees as far as, grant funding or promotion, things like that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. You can only put so much into a talk. I feel as though there could be a whole nother presentation on research directions and the newer research and where we're going. If you remember back to the definition of mentorship, it's framed by the National Academies as a working alliance. So that's incredibly important. When you go back to the working alliance literature from psychotherapy, it's this dynamic back and forth between the mentor and the mentee, or the 2 individuals in the relationship, in this case, mentees and mentors. Typically, mentorship research focuses on just one or the other, but both viewpoints are really important. So current research that we're doing is actually looking at both perspectives on how the relationship's going and the alignment in perspectives and how that impacts these mentee outcomes. So I think more to your question, when we say outcomes, a lot of times those are short-term outcomes. They're those psychosocial measures, which we know are linked to long-term pieces. We do have some grants where we're looking 2, 3, 10 years out. We just launched a survey looking at all of our trained mentors. So again, that 5,000 plus group, which means mentors who were trained up to 11 years ago, and looking at what behaviors are they implementing now in their relationship. So we'll have the data on that soon. We have that piece. We're also working on, right, because the big question is long-term mentee outcomes. career progression, papers, right? Those really like key career development pieces that are so hard to capture because surveying mentees 10 years out is hard to get any sort of response rate. So we're working with a group at UW-Madison in Info Sciences, and we're actually using public information to look at, we have a list of our trained mentors and who their mentees were, and actually go and find their information. Again, this is a new grant, but find their information in the public scope and see what has their career progression been, what are their current titles, what are their publications, and then using propensity score matching, looking at those who had mentors go through training versus those who didn't, and comparing those. So we are getting there to really those key long-term pieces. I know NIH always wants those as well for any sort of intervention that's being tested and funded. But those are just a couple of our research directions in that.
Hey, yeah, that sounds really great. Looking forward to seeing that. I think Dr. Leader has his hand up.
Yeah, I apologize if I missed this, but I'm curious about the group of mentors who indicated that, and this, I might be paraphrasing here, they were not going, they didn't plan to make any changes to their mentoring style. Do you have any follow-up on them, or are they so old that they've, they can't be taught any new tricks, or are they generally not engaged? Like,
Yeah.
do you have any feedback on them?
That is a great question. I don't believe there was any sort of follow-up on them from the original randomized controlled trial. So these would be individuals who went through a mentor training, if I'm understanding correctly, and report that no, they do not plan to make any changes, or no, they did not make any changes. And while it's a small group, I think that's a really interesting question. It is not one that we have explored, actually. But now that it's in my head, I think we might be able to go back and pursue that a little bit.
Well, it seems to me that might be a clinical and translational science issue in terms of what is there a barrier as to why an individual sees no value in improving. Personally, I don't think any of us are completed works, no matter how white our hair might become. So what is it that prevents somebody from wanting to do better if they're seriously invested in seeing mentees grow and develop? It's a rhetorical question, but I just find it curious.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I haven't thought about specifically following up with those individuals who said no to that. I do know we've put out other studies looking at essentially asking, do you wish you can be a different mentor, be a better mentor? What do you wish you could change about your mentoring? And what is stopping you from doing that, right? So that barrier question. Typically what we find is those are some of those structural elements. Biggest one, they don't have time. It's not recognized, it's not rewarded. So there's this duality between wanting to be a better mentor and the ability to be a better mentor. And again, not from a confidence perspective, but from a structural perspective that's there. So that's actually, when we study mentoring relationships, we in the past have focused on mentee outcomes a lot, how positive mentoring relationships lead to positive mentee outcomes. We want to flip that and look at the other side of the model. So when a mentor goes through training, what encourages them to make those changes and what structural issues stop them from doing that?
So I'll just follow up one more time and then shut up so other people can take a turn. It seems to me that that what you just said falls into a similar category as team science in terms of recognition for contributions to the team as being another element that's not generally recognized in our current structure for promotion and tenure, for example. So maybe finding a solution to recognition, appropriate recognition, might also be something that's applicable to team science and maybe other things that currently are not routinely part of the consideration for promotion or recognition in the institution. So I've said enough. I'm going to go mute just in case I feel the urge to say something else.
Thank you.
Okay, so another camera on. Do we have another question? Robin, did you have a question? No. Okay. Any other questions? I saw Mario's camera come on briefly. Thought maybe he had a question. Not, I'll ask another one. So I saw in your model, you wrap sponsorship up with mentorship, or part of the definition includes sponsorship. But over the past few years, I've heard a lot of talk of mentorship and sponsorship separately, and that, you know, someone could be a mentor and they could be a sponsor, or could they be both? So how do you view mentorship separately from sponsorship, or do you view it as separate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you're referring to kind of the list of attributes that have been identified in effective mentoring, with effective mentorship. And there's a whole range. So sponsorship and coaching are the two that tend to be, are they in mentorship or are they outside of mentorship? We don't have a set answer. We are currently creating models where we're identifying an interpersonal component to the mentoring relationship. So that's really kind of that trust. How effective is the mentor at communicating, that relational aspect between the mentor and the mentee, and how that impacts other things such as networking, sponsorship, some of those other pieces. But that's still something we're looking at. It also, I think, depends a little bit on career stage of the mentee as to how vital that role is. We know there's a lot of different roles that mentors can play. So sometimes one mentor plays all those roles, and sometimes there's those mentor networks, as we call them, when you look at the different structures. So maybe a mentor is not the sponsor, but they have identified someone else as the sponsor. So I think teasing out those pieces as well, but I don't have a clear answer. It's not very clear yet, I don't think, in the research in general.
You. And then Steve, even though he's not talking, he put in the chat that advocacy is also being included in mentorship and sponsorship.
Exactly.
Any other questions from the group? I don't want to provide the bulk of the questions, but I'll ask one more, and then hopefully someone else will ask one. So in the trial you did of the mentor-mentee training, I didn't see any like demographic information or anything that kind of described what that cohort looked like. Can you describe a little bit of what the cohort makeup was, if possible, and if there were any differences in the effectiveness of the training on the mentor-mentee relative to, you know, like the mentor professional stage, whether assistant professor, associate professor, or any other demographics?
Yeah, so the way that they set up that original trial, again, it used the clinical and translational research curriculum. So everyone's kind of in that clinical translational area for discipline. The mentees were early career faculty and the mentors were senior faculty. So one of the things that we were really careful to continue testing after that is a very specific group of individuals. Career stage did not vary amongst them at all. It was intentionally targeted that way. So what works for, you know, mentees who are already early faculty might be different than someone who's a postdoc or who's even a grad student. And so as we've adapted and developed different curriculas, we've ensured, again, with some of these other papers looking at outcomes, that it does cross all career stages. So not from the randomized control trial, but the other results I showed from the trainings led by the principal facilitators. If you were to look at a breakdown of that data, you would see it spanning all the way from undergraduate all the way up to senior faculty per career stage, and you do see significant gains in each of those demographic groups.
What about like any other demographics, like gender, or were you able to look at gender or race or ethnicity or any of those?
The curricula seems to work across all groups. That doesn't mean that it works the same way. So that is another thing, you know, we had to build the sample size to be able to do cuts to different groups. We currently are looking at kind of the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, and gender, and how different competencies within the training might touch on different groups in a different way. So ideally, what we want to get to is, let's talk about who the mentee or the mentor are, right? And then how can we best tailor a curriculum to match their needs, knowing that everybody on some level has different needs, but there might be some commonalities between these groups that we can do. But again, it takes a very large sample size to be able to tailor down that much. So takeaway, it works across all groups. We have yet to find a group that it doesn't work on. How well and the mechanism behind why it works and how it works is something we're still diving into and exploring.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We do have a question in the chat. When the training time goes beyond 4 hours, is there a proportionate increase in benefit?
This is a good question. It does not appear so. Now, the reason I'm a little hesitant on that is our trainings, if someone does a 5 or 6 hour training, it is not always the same 5 or 6 modules used. So remember, the curricula, you can customize it, right? So you can choose what modules you want to do. So when we talk about gains from certain dosages, it's very hard to capture because a 5 hour training might not look the same across every implementation. When we get up into the 8 and 10 hour trainings, those look the same because we know that they used a certain set of modules. They're called full trainings, so those do look the same. It appears that 4 hours is the cutoff. So when we recommend what dosage training, we say you want at least 4 hours. The next step is really the full 8 hour, 10 hour training. So you're getting all the competencies, which are touching on multiple areas.
And so for the 4 hours, is that any module? Or is that a
Each
set?
module is typically an hour in the training, so any set of 3 to 4 modules. There are some that, if it's a first-time training, we tend to suggest, specifically communication, for example, is a big one, and that module tends to have a stronger impact than the other modules when we've kind of looked at the how they affect skill gains individually, or how they affect overall quality individually.
Right. Steve has another question.
Yeah, sorry. So you partially answered it. But so is there a rank order of modules that across the entire study, people who report that they have, mentors who report that they have incorporated something new from the training into their mentoring practice? Is there a one module or more that seems to be of value to quite a few people? So that if somebody was to look at this and say, you know, what might I most benefit from? You have some sort of data to say, here's what, 80% of people who've taken the training found to be most helpful.
Yeah, so we get at it a little differently. We look at, so for each module, when we assess skill gains, there's 2 to 3 questions, sometimes 4, that really capture that module and what should be learned from it. So for communication, there's 3 items that measure skill gains within that competency. And then we essentially map those onto intent and for behavioral change, as well as perceived overall quality of the mentoring they can provide. We find that communication and aligning expectations are the 2 modules that really just outweigh all the other modules or all the other competencies. So that's why typically when someone's putting together a training, we suggest those as our base ones. Part of the survey we just launched is this is the one for all trained mentors. And we came up with a list of behaviors that one might implement after training. So these would be suggested behaviors from the training for the communication module, for the aligning expectations, for fostering independence. So it'll be interesting when we get that data back to see which behaviors were actually employed, X number of years down the line, and which ones weren't. I think that will also speak to how powerful the modules were, and perhaps give it a little bit more of that ranking order.
Well, yeah, it'd be nice to know if the mentees, the behavior change that the mentees identify as being changed, map back to what the mentor thinks he or she
Yes.
have changed.
Yeah, and that's part of that that dualistic model that we've kind of been talking about that we're exploring now. A mentor might say, oh yeah, I did these 4 behaviors. That's great, things are going great. And the mentee might either identify different behaviors or not notice those behaviors. So if a mentor is employing the behaviors, but a mentee is not perceiving them, or maybe they're noticing them, but it's not affecting how they view the relationship, it's not really leading to positive outcomes. What does that mean and how do we address that? So that's part of kind of what we're digging into now.
Hey, any other questions from the group? Not, I think we will go ahead and end. Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. We really appreciate this excellent presentation. So I'm sure we'll also be in touch about some of the resources that you discussed today. So thank you for joining us.
Of course, it was wonderful to meet you all. Thank you again for the opportunity. And yes, happy to answer any other questions about resources or anything like that.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank
Bye, have a
you.
good day.
You too.